There you go.
We're good.
Awesome.
All right. All right, everyone. It looks like we are, it's officially 11. I think we can just give it just 30 seconds here because I see that the people are still kind of logging in. So let's give it just a bit more time. And then we can get started. All right, I think we're ready to roll. So just wanted to kickstart things. I'm the president of CTR, and I did see the attendee list, so I know we have a lot of our clients on the call. If you would advance to the next slide, John, I think we can go ahead and.
Oops. So here's our agenda for today.
All right, so just wanted to introduce everybody that we have on the call today. So I'm Bridget Escobar, the president of CTR. We've got Doug Emmerich from CTR, the director of IT. And then we have John Hensberger and Mark Malloy, and they are with Black Bottle IT. And so CTR hired Black Bottle. We really were looking for a managed service IT provider that was very security conscious and was very aware of the latest and greatest security tools. As a payroll company, obviously, security needs to be first and foremost in our minds every day. And we wanted to work with a partner that was putting security first as well. We've enjoyed working with them, and we thought that it would be great to share their knowledge with the rest of our client base as well. So we thank all of the CTR clients for joining us today. We think that this will be a great session. And then CTR will be jumping on later in the session just to give you some further security tips and tricks when it comes to iSolved, as well as some of the things we're doing with CTR internally from a security standpoint.
Great, right. Thanks, Bridget. My name is Mark Malloy. I work with Black Bottle IT. I'm a cybersecurity advisor as well as an account manager. Thank you guys all for joining us today and taking the time to listen to us in our webinar. Black Bottle IT, our goal is to help clients create strong cybersecurity postures for themselves. We're a cybersecurity company first and a managed service provider second. Naturally, by working with clients in the cybersecurity realm, we moved into that MSP space. But our primary focus is cybersecurity and has been cybersecurity. A lot of what we do is cybersecurity consulting. And today we want you guys to leave with hopefully some tangible information and knowledge that you can go to your next board meeting or go to management with. That'll help you guys mitigate risk as well as be able to identify what risks you face. And that's kind of the primary message we want to get to you guys today is how do you analyze your risk and how do you work to mitigate said risk, right? When it comes to cybersecurity, and what are ways that you can strengthen your cybersecurity posture?
Yeah, I like to add a little bit to that. I'm John Hensberger, like president of, so I would just like to add like a little bit about maybe what we do a little bit differently is that, you know, when we walk into a company, we're talking to a business owner or like somebody in IT, like leadership, I mean, we're really focused on like risk to the business versus maybe some of the technology tools that are in place to try to help with like the cybersecurity. So I think that's the difference is we're talking first about risk. Where is data? How is it stored? Like what do the bad guys want first? And then we kind of come up with a strategy out of that. And kind of walking into, clients, and like most clients don't have a culture of cybersecurity. So it's something that we have to kind of educate them on lots of the threats out there and about the culture of the people and what to look for. And so it was a real breath of like fresh air to meet like Bridget and Doug, because we walked in there and they had already had a culture of security, like they were already doing a lot of the right things. And so they had that security top of mind. They, they had their people are all, security conscious. And so that was a little different for us, to be honest, because like normally there's a little bit of a, there's a little bit of a curve there to get them up to that point. So, so I just wanted to say that.
So just to chime in here, housekeeping items. If you do have questions, we do have the chat open. I will be monitoring the chat. If there's questions that tie in with what's being talked about, we can throw them, into the mix as we're going along here. If there's some things that might be a little off track, we can attack those at the end. If there's too many questions to address, or we might not know the answer at this exact moment, we can certainly follow up with you directly and individually after the session. Okay.
All
So
right.
yeah, just to begin, John, you can move on to the next slide. We're gonna have John Hensberger just explain an anecdotal story of his when he was an IT director at another company, and kind of what happened whenever he experienced the breach firsthand. And this kind of led into why John created the company he created through Black Bottle, through his experience with a cyber breach and all of that. So John, I'll let you.
Yeah. So, so like I went through a cyber event. I could talk an hour about it. I won't, but I'll just give you the highlights. So, like we had a cyber event. We had we had somebody like reporting to the company that we were actively sending data to a third party, like IP address in, in like Eastern Europe. And like, so we weren't even like aware that we were doing it. And like, so we had to like respond to that event. And so like the events that we had to go through and like what we had to learn was there was a lot of chaos. So basically you're talking about somebody telling you that you have an event and saying, okay, so now what do you do? Like we had all the things in place. So we had, like malware, like antivirus, updated firewall, security training annually, backups, like outsourced MSP. I mean, like we had all that stuff in place, right? And so like it wasn't good enough. So the first call was to the MSP. They say, I don't know, I can't help you. I mean, we have all these tools in place. We're your outsourced provider. We got all this stuff. I can just tell you that there's nothing going on that we can see. Okay. So then
and your MSP is your managed service provider, your IT company.
Yeah, right? Correct. And like, so then it's so then it became this exercise of, okay, I have to find some outside expertise to help us. So I started making phone calls, and people were wanting to book us blocks of hours to do investigation, and they were charging $50,000 a block, and we were a small company. So like I wasn't sure that was the right path. So then like, so then like the CFO says, well, like to me, like we have like an insurance policy. Why don't you call the insurance company? I did. And so they said, well, we'll call you back in 3 days. And so that's not an effective answer to that. And like, so we're trying to figure out how to respond. So that we didn't have a plan to respond to an incident. Okay. Obviously we didn't. So then we finally got in touch with, so then we finally learned that as part of our insurance policy, we had access to the resources. Like data breach coach was one of those resources. So they gave me a list of 10. I called the first one, like it's an attorney. They said, okay, like if you want to engage us, sign this agreement. We did. And then that kind of led us to more things. So then there's all these people wanting to send SWAT teams of people to our building to do like investigation and spend like, like 50,000, 100,000, all these dollars and all this information. And I wasn't quite sure what to do and how to respond, because again, we were a small company and those dollars mattered. And like, so then at the same time I have that, then I have all of the, and then I have the CEO saying, how bad is the data breach? Are we out of business? What's the exposure? So I say all that to say that we went through a lot of that, and after 3 months of figuring out what we lost and figuring out who to like obtain to help us investigate and then remediate, and like like dealing with like insurance companies and claims and all that stuff, we spent $250,000 to learn that we may have lost 250 pieces of information. That's the outcome. But like the disruption to the business was very costly, because all of the IT resources were dedicated to figuring out what we lost, getting data to like the forensics company. And it was just a costly from, the like opportunity cost perspective. And we basically stopped all IT function and we had to deal with this event. So like the takeaways that I learned from that were, like the traditional things that we had in place were not sufficient. 2 is that we did not have a good plan to respond to that incident. 3 is that, 3 is that the managed service provider that we had was not up to par on like the security aspects of doing IT work. 4th is that there were a lot of third parties that wanted to come and dip their hand in that cookie jar for money to help us, and they may or may not have been the wrong thing, and there was a lot of things to have to evaluate in a very short period of time. And then finally, that like the process for the claim for insurance, I didn't even know we had cyber insurance when we did it. To just honest, I didn't even know we did. So so like those are the things that I learned. And so then as a result of that, and the result of all of that, like I figured that there were people that were having these events and were in my shoes that did not know how to respond, did not know what the right course of action was. I mean, there's a right level of response depending upon how big your breach is. Like there is money that you could spend, you could not spend, and there's lots of decisions that you need to make in a very short period of time. And I figured that, like people were in my boat. And so I thought, well, I can probably help other people maybe navigate through these a little bit better. So ergo, like Black Bottle IT was formed, and we started consulting with small business about cybersecurity risk and how to respond in the event that you have an incident. So that's kind of the genesis of the company and like why we do what we do. And that's kind of the core of everything we do is to like prevent these things from happening, but if they do happen, which they will, well, then how to respond to them. So that was a little bit more long-winded than I want, but
So to begin, we kind of just want to give you guys a lay of the land with what some current cybersecurity trends are. So we're going to give you guys a little bit of data on some threats that are being faced. Some of these you probably already have heard of, but it just kind of what we want to show is that cyber criminals are always exponentially growing and finding new ways to attack businesses of all sizes, small, medium, large. And these are things you need to be aware of. So phishing attacks, there were more than 255 million phishing attacks that occurred in 2022, and that was a 61% increase. Phishing attacks are a common attack vector I'm sure all of you have heard of. Typically, they're coming through your email accounts where someone's spoofing an email or mimicking an email that may be from your company or from a company that you may know. You enter your email credentials or you click on a link and then you're compromised. Again, this is one of the most common forms of attacks out there. The largest data breach in 2022 was through a phishing attack at Acorn Financial Services. This is something that everyone needs to be aware of. It happens every day. And this is also why, and we'll talk about this a bit more later, having security awareness training for your employees is crucial, because you can have all of the tools in the world, but if you open up the front door and let somebody in, those tools are not going to really be able to do much. If an employee, for example, is trained improperly and doesn't understand how to identify phishing attacks and what to do in the event of a phishing attack. Another very common attack vector is ransomware attacks. I'm sure everyone has heard of that. A ransomware attack is what paralyzed the gas pipelines on the East Coast a year or two ago. And if you're not familiar with ransomware, what ransomware is basically it's an agent that enters your cyber environment. That can be through a phishing attack, or it can be through malicious websites or websites where there's a lot of junk mail, ads, or things to click on. Once they're in your system, they're going to encrypt all of your information. Once your information is encrypted, the only way to unencrypt it is to have the encryption key. And in order to get that key from the malicious actor, you need to pay a ransom, which is why it's called a ransomware attack. There are a few ways to combat ransomware attacks. The one being, again, having security awareness training in place so that your employees know what to do and what not to do on company computers, such as what websites to not go to, what not to click on, as well as how to identify phishing emails, since that is one of the largest vectors for ransomware attacks as well. Some other important components that we can talk about a bit more in a little bit is having an adequate backup strategy. If you have different segmented forms of backup for your IT data, even if one form is compromised, you can wipe those systems and re-download a clean version of your data without the ransomware on it. So ransomware attacks are very common. They're very dangerous to your company, and it's something to be aware of. And as we see here, ransomware attacks occur about every 2 seconds, and they account for about 10% of all breaches in the United States.
Like, and I'd also add to that slide that, you know, that there are, you know, these bad actor organizations, and they're sort of sophisticated. So some of them will have, you know, like ransomware, like platform that they have ransomware, like software that they will sell to other bad actor organizations, and like then their fee for the software is a piece of the ransomware. So it's like exponential growth of the spread of ransomware. So like there's like a business around selling ransomware to bad actors that don't have expertise to make their own, but they know that they want to do it. And so like that's been a trend for the last few years, and it is growing the number of you know, like these attacks, you know, by, like by like a lot. So, you know, so like it's not going to get any better. It's only going to get worse. And I would also like to say that there is a trend that there are some states in that are like making it illegal for you to pay the ransomware. So basically, if you're a business and you have a ransomware and maybe you have some state funding for something, well, then the state will, you know, it will like not allow you to pay the ransomware because you are getting state funding. And that's one way that that's one way that people are like trying to fight the ransomware, is just don't pay the ransom. However, that has an impact to the business, because that is sometimes the only way to like recover your data is to pay the ransom. So there are some interesting things going on in that specific space.
And the best way to avoid that then, especially if you're in one of those states, is to have the protocols in place and the tools in place that you aren't dependent upon paying the ransom. So,
yep.
So another important thing to mention now is historically people think that, you know, in order to be breached, you have to be a very large company, over 1,000 employees or 10,000 employees. You need to be a multi-million-dollar company. What we're seeing now is that businesses of all shapes and sizes are being compromised on a daily basis. We have mom and pop contractors calling us who have a plumbing company who are being breached with ransomware. Now, granted, the demands for the ransomware won't be as significant as it will be for, say, you know, Acorn Financial Services, but, you know, it'll still be a ransom of, say, potentially $10,000, $20,000, which a small company or a small contractor might not be able to pay. All this being said, to demonstrate that just because you're not necessarily a massive enterprise company or a Fortune 500 company doesn't mean that you are now not at risk. Everybody is at risk. Everyone's being compromised. So it's important that you have these tools in place and you have the knowledge in place to handle these. As we see here, 46% of all cyber breaches impact businesses with fewer than 1,000 employees, and 75% of small to medium-sized businesses could not continue operating if they were hit with ransomware. Another key point, though, is since everyone now is at risk, one thing that a lot of businesses need to take into account is, do you have cyber insurance? And if you don't, you seriously need to consider looking into getting a cyber policy, because in the event that you do happen to have a breach or an incident, the cyber insurance could be the difference between you staying in business or potentially being forced out of business through the cost of recovering from one of these breaches. So now that we covered kind of the landscape of some of the threats facing companies of all sizes in this day and age, we want to kind of get into the meat of the presentation. And what we want you guys to leave with today are two major concepts, and our understanding of these concepts is: one, how to assess cyber risk, and then two, in part 4, is going to be mitigating this risk. In today's environment, companies need to be assessing their cyber risk on a regular basis. A cyber plan you created and haven't looked at in 5 years is no longer going to cut it. As we saw with COVID-19, overnight employees went from working at the office in a potentially secure environment to working from home. This means that your cybersecurity landscape and the risk factors your company face changed literally overnight. So have you and or your company assessed your cyber risk and the cyber landscape that you are in recently? Yes or no? If it's something you haven't done, it needs to be done at least on a biannual basis, because attacks, threats, and vectors are changing all the time. We no longer really have the luxury of being able to create a plan and not having to look at it for a few years, because of the evolution of cyber threats was so slow or low back in the early to mid 2000s. So being on top of assessing risk and working to mitigate that risk is something that needs to be top of mind for all management and board for companies of all sizes.
Yeah, and I'd also like to add to this that, I mean, like the remote work piece, I mean, I think that, there was a lot of companies that had to transition to home like in haste because of need. And now I think there's enough time that's gone by that I think everybody on the call knows that, like the remote work is here to stay to some degree, whether it's a hybrids, some days in the office, some days out of office, whether it's 100% remote, but there is a degree of that is going to remain. And I think that our, like the way that we work and like where we work has changed, and that is going to continue for the foreseeable future. So like that affects the cybersecurity plan and how you protect work from home people a lot.
So the first most important factor is analyzing your risk. You need to identify, first of all, what is risk? Now that might seem obvious to some people, but it's more than just having a cybersecurity breach, right? It's more than just opening up a phishing email. It could be an employee risk. Do you have a disgruntled employee who has credentials, who you may have potentially just let go? Now, do you have the right offboarding procedure in place to make sure that that employee's credentials are removed from the system so they don't have access to any potentially risky information? Do you have policies and procedures in place so that employees only have access to information they need access to, so that access to sensitive data isn't widespread throughout the company so anybody could potentially get their hands on these types of information? You also have vendor risk. You may have all the tools, policies, procedures in place, but are the companies you're working with, third-party vendors you're working with, do they have the correct tools and infrastructure in place so they have a secure cyber posture? A lot of breaches we're seeing today aren't just from companies not being prepared or companies making a mistake. A lot of companies have what they need in place, but where they're getting tied up is they're working with third-party vendors that don't have their ducks in a row. And when that vendor gets compromised, many times people don't realize they've been compromised because a lot of these cyber criminals, they're very good at hiding the activity that they're doing on your system. So sometimes a vendor won't know for months they've been compromised. And in the meantime, they've been able to siphon off information from that vendor. And then also they've been able sometimes to spoof people in the company, such as, an accountant or something like that, to then trick their other vendors or people they're working with into giving them sensitive data. So a major risk factor as well is your vendors, and that's why we'll talk a little bit about how you can mitigate that risk when it comes to vendors. We'll talk about how to mitigate employee risk. Another potential risk people don't think about is environmental risk. For example, if you're working in Florida or you're working in an area prone to natural disasters, do you have a backup strategy in place so that if, for example, your server room gets flooded or a tornado, takes your building down, do you have the backup strategy? Do you have a disaster recovery plan in place to be able to, get back up and running as soon as possible to recover all of your sensitive information as soon as possible? Another potential risk is your infrastructure, right? So are your servers end of life? Have you gone down to that server room that's probably been accumulating dust and made sure that all of your servers aren't end of life, aren't legacy machines that might give out at any moment? Have you assessed potentially a hybrid backup strategy of keeping your most sensitive information in the cloud so that in case you lose some of your servers or computers, you're able to regain that information? All this being said is that risk is a little bit more nuanced than many people tend to believe. So it's good to go back and take a look in a 360 manner at what all type of risk are you facing. It's not just phishing emails. It's not just ransomware attacks. It can also be internal. Another very important portion too, John, you can go back one sec, sorry, is you also need to define what needs protected, right? You need to figure out where your sensitive information resides. Are you making sure that all of your sensitive information is being properly stored? Is it protected? So not only is it analyzing what your risk is, it's also identifying what needs protected and where it is at. And we'll talk a little bit about more about that here in the next slide, John. So there's some of the obvious types of risky data. There's employee information, social security numbers, bank account information. There's also sensitive information that may have to do with, personal health information that's protected by HIPAA. There's also protecting your client's data, and there's also protected information, industry-specific proprietary information, or what we call CUI, controlled unclassified information. So as you're analyzing your risk, you need to take a step back and also decide what data needs protected and how are you going to protect it, right? Some people just think, it might just be, personal health information. Well, do you have proprietary information or knowledge that needs protected? Are you within the Department of Defense supply chain, and do you have CUI or controlled unclassified information? There's a lot of data that sometimes is overlooked and not valued enough, and hence it's not protected. So part of the risk assessment and analyzing phase is also identifying what information you have, where is it, and how are you going to protect that information?
Yeah, and I'd also like to add that, when the bad guys are trying to infiltrate your systems and find sensitive data, I mean, they're just looking for any kind of data that they can leverage in any kind of way. And it doesn't matter what it is, right? So they're not necessarily hunting for social security numbers, bank account. I mean, they're not hunting for specifics. They're just saying, I mean, when they, when they find data and say, okay, well, I have some social security numbers. That's great. I'm going to put that in my bag for later, right? I have bank account numbers, put that in my bag for later. I have maybe some, the proprietary information about, like a company's product. Okay, I'll put that in my bag for later, right? So they're not necessarily hunting for a specific thing. They just want whatever they can get that is potentially sensitive that they can leverage in a way that is damaging to your business. So again, just to note, I mean, they're not looking for specifics. They just want what they can get, right?
So once you've been able to kind of analyze your risk, you can determine what needs protected. You have to now look at how to calculate your risk. And we're going to show some examples of these in the next few slides. But some of these methods could be an impact rating scale. This is where you basically decide what's at risk, and if it's compromised, how much damage would it do to your company, your clients, et cetera. And it's a way to quantify on a scale from 1 to 5 the amount of risk you face. And then based off of something that might be deemed as high risk, then you understand that you need to take extra measures to protect that information. Other ways of calculating your risk, you can do an IT assessment. That could be in-house or through a third party. You can hold yourself to a compliance standard. Typically, our baseline compliance standard is NIST 800-171. That's mandatory for companies that work within the Department of Defense, and it's kind of a federal guideline that we think provides a strong cybersecurity posture. There's also SOC 1 and SOC 2 compliance standards. I believe CTR is SOC 1 compliant. That's what they hold themselves to. Other means are going through phishing simulations. There's programs and software you can use or companies you can work with that will put your company and your employees through phishing simulations on a regular basis, security awareness training on a regular basis. And then on the back end, on the management side, you can look at who's completing those exams, who's failing, where your risk is within the company, which employees may need extra training in order to avoid exposing your company to a breach. Another very important way of assessing and calculating risk are vulnerability scans. These sometimes are people think are synonymous with penetration testing. They're actually pretty different. Penetration tests can be a little bit cost prohibitive, especially for small to medium-sized businesses. Vulnerability scans, though, on the other hand, are a lot less cost prohibitive. And they allow you to, as is in the name, check for vulnerabilities internally inside your cyber environment, as well as externally. And we'll get a little bit more into the semantics of what exactly vulnerability scans are in a later slide. Penetration tests, if you can afford to perform them on an annual basis, it's highly suggested. Basically, an ethical hacker is paid to try and exploit any vulnerabilities within your system. And they'll generate a report. Same with the vulnerability scans, will get a report generated that'll outline what was checked, what was found, how to mitigate those risks, so that in the future you're not exposed to that type of threat. An important piece when it comes to analyzing third-party vendor risk is we highly suggest creating a cybersecurity questionnaire that you send to your vendors to have them fill out, so that you're covering the bases that they are now telling you that they meet X and Y standards, that they have X and Y in place, so that you know that you're working with vendors that have a cybersecurity posture that should protect you in the event that they have some type of breach. Finally, it's very important once you create an incident response plan, which we will talk about a little bit more throughout the presentation, that you have annual fire drills. So once you have a plan in place, it's not good enough just to have a plan. You need to practice that plan, which means once a year at a minimum, twice a year preferably. If you can do it on a quarterly basis, even better. You need to sit down with your management team and whoever's part of the incident response plan, and you need to go through, okay, we've had a ransomware attack. Who's the team leader? Who's notifying, our cybersecurity insurance team? Who's notifying the FBI if it's a relevant breach that needs to be upgraded to that point? How do you respond, and how do you, there's the old saying, you play how you practice, right? So you need to make sure that you're practicing these plans, so in the case that there is a breach, you know exactly what to do and how to do it. Here are some of the examples of how you can calculate your risk. On the left, you see an impact rating scale. In this case, it's based off of confidentiality. So if on the left, you see I guess you could call the y-axis, we're testing for confidentiality. And so say if customers' information was stolen or confidentiality was lost, would no customers be impacted? So that would fall under insignificant. It would be a quantifiable score of 1. Or would high volume over 100,000 customers be impacted? That would mean it's critical. It'd be a score of 5. Another example would be if sensitive data was lost and confidentiality was lost, would you have to notify regulatory agencies? If you wouldn't, you could say maybe that would be an insignificant threat. You could grade it as a 1. If you would have to notify all of your clients and all of the regulators you work with, if you're in a highly regulated industry, you could quantify that as a 5, critical. So using impact rating scales based on the context of your company is a way that you can quantify and put into numbers what risk you face and what needs protected, right? For certain industries, confidentiality is going to be much more important than for others. If you're in the financial industry, being able to protect customer information, or if you're in the healthcare industry, being able to protect personal health information is going to be much more critical than, say, if potentially you're a plumber or a contractor. It might not be necessarily as important or burdensome to your business if that information is lost.
And Mark, just want to chime in here. Being the fact that we are a payroll company, we're going to be certainly at a higher scale
Yes.
on the vendor list. And we do get these requests, but I will say I'm shocked at how few of these we do get. We have a security packet that we put together. We have some publicly traded companies and banks that have a regular process to ask us for these items, and we have them readily available for you. But for the most part, you know, most customers do not ask for this, and even a lot of large customers do not ask us for this. That's why we wanted to bring this to you today, because you know, we do feel there's a lot of education and a lot of things that our client base can learn. We want you to ask us for these things. So just surprised at the level that we don't get these questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, you know, I mean, like these things that we're talking about need to be, you know, annually at minimum, you know, like reviewed. So, you know, like, I mean, like CTR and us, I mean, annually review this impact rating scale and say, okay, so this is the data, and so this is the category. Has anything changed? Do we have any like more data that needs to be analyzed? That like is data more, you know, is there more of it? Like, does it have to go up on the scale or not? I mean, so like this gets reviewed annually at minimum. So, and it is like it is like a living, breathing thing that needs to be reviewed, you know, I mean, like periodically, because businesses change and things like change from month to month, from year to year. So like it does have to, you know, like get like reviewed by the team.
Yep. And the point of this too is we want to give you guys, so these are tangible assets now you can research or find through a third party or create in-house, that you can take to your management team or to a board meeting and say, hey, listen, this is, because sometimes I think the biggest impediment to companies analyzing risk and trying to mitigate the risk, especially when it comes to cybersecurity, is they don't know where to start. So this is a perfect way to figure out how to start. This is a way you can quantify, okay, here's a starting point on how we can analyze, you know, what's most significant that we need to protect, what is less significant. And then from there, you can start saying, all right, let's at least start locking down what is critical to our company, right? Because a breach isn't just about the financial loss you might face, it's also reputational damages. I mean, there's a lot of ways that a breach can do harm to your company. It's not just how long you're out of service and how much it costs to get back on your feet. You might have clients who will never want to return because they don't trust that you have the capability to protect their information. And that's also why, as we said earlier, working with vendors who have a strong cybersecurity posture is essential. And that's why we work with clients to create vendor questionnaires, such as the example here on the right, where you create a list. And this is something you can do as well at home. You create a list of, or with your company, you create a list of, you know, anywhere from 10 to 40 to 50, as many questions as you think you need to ask in order to establish if the vendor you're working with has a strong cybersecurity posture. Like, you know, do they have cyber insurance? What tools are they using? Do they have encryption enabled? All of these are good, A to C. I mean, because if you send this to a vendor and they don't have any of this in place, you might say, you know what, it's not worth the risk. We'll find someone else in the same industry. Also, they might say yes to all this, and then potentially they're lying. Well, if it turns out they're breached and they lied on this questionnaire, now you might have some legal standing. You can go back and say, hey, they said to me that they have this X, Y, and Z in place, and it turns out they lied to get the business or the contract, and as a result, now we're compromised with them. So having these things in place, such as a questionnaire, help cover your you know, cover your back in case something does happen and you are compromised.
Yeah, because like if you just look at that question too on that example, you know, I mean, do they have a cyber insurance? I mean, so, you know, if you have a vendor who has a breach of scale, you know, and they have a policy that's like $1 million and they have thousands of clients, well, then what's the likelihood of your damages getting repaid out of that policy? And like, that's just one example, just to make sure that they have adequate coverage in the event they have a breach. So, and that's just one example. You know, and like we do this now, and you know, like we like review all of these vendor questionnaires. And like, so if there's anything that we see that is suspect, if there's a no answer to any of them, well, then we'll go back to like Bridget and say, hey, you know, like here's a no, and you might want to look into this vendor and figure out like why it's a no. So, I mean, like we do that for them now.
And again, even with the encryption portion too, it's not just you have to remember, a lot of these vendors may also have some of your sensitive information, which puts you at risk. So if someone, say you're a payroll company, for example, and you have sensitive client data, and now one of these vendors might, you know, through whatever transactions you're working with them, have that client's data as well, that client might blame you if that information's lost, right? Despite the fact it might not have really been your fault. So you want to make sure that their backups are encrypted, that they have protection, so that even if you're covering all the bases for your client information, that they are too, so that whenever they have your sensitive data, that it's protected and safe as well. So a few more examples here on ways you can kind of analyze your risk and calculate your risk, because again, sometimes those are hard concepts to wrap your hands around. There's here, we're going to talk a little bit more about vulnerability scans. This is an example of a vulnerability scan that can be performed. In essence, a vulnerability scan versus a penetration test, the vulnerability scan is going to be an automated agent, an agent that's going to go through your systems and look for all known vulnerabilities out of a large database or library of known threats. And it's going to poke and prod, either if it's an external vulnerability scan through your external facing IPs, or if it's an internal vulnerability scan, it's an agent that's going to be put on all your devices, and it's going to look for all types of known threats, whether that be as simple as a software update to maybe you have backdoors that you didn't realize were in your system. And based on that scan, it's going to tell you what it looked for, what it found, how critical those issues are. And then it's also going to, with the report generated through the team, it's going to tell you how you're going to mitigate all of those issues. So running these, and again, one of the main differences between a vulnerability scan and a penetration test is a vulnerability scan is a lot less cost prohibitive. So typically we encourage companies to do these types of scans on a quarterly basis, if not biannual basis, just to see if there's anything new that may have popped up that you're not aware of, that may have been missed by your IT team if you have one. And then from there you can, you know, secure whatever and lock down whatever needs locked down. Another way of checking and calculating your risk is through compliance frameworks. The one we typically use is NIST 800-171. That's actually going to be getting rolled into a new framework that's going to be called CMMC, or the Cyber Maturity Security Model Certification. And for example, so for NIST is what we use. It covers 110 controls across 14 families. You can have a score of 110, which is perfect, or you can have a score of up to -203, and that's because certain questions are weighted. And this covers everything from access control to physical security of your business, and it covers the whole gamut. And for us, we think that's a very good baseline to kind of judge where you're at on a cybersecurity scale, from, you know, -203 to a +110. And so that's something we control a lot against. And by the way, if you're within the DoD or Department of Defense supply chain, NIST 800-171 has been mandatory, but a lot of people haven't been really complying with it. And when it's segued into CMMC, you will need to be audited in order to continue to gain or win government contracts. So a good way to prepare for CMMC, if you are in the DoD supply chain, is to get a head start with NIST and start working towards that, because it is a 6 to 12 month process for many companies to become fully compliant. And if you are within that DoD supply chain, it will be mandatory to gain contracts, win contracts for CMMC, and you will be audited in order to receive approval. Okay, so rolling into part 4 here. I know we kind of threw probably a lot at you in that first section. At this point, you should have an idea of how to analyze risk, what you need to protect. Now we're going to talk a little bit about, once you have all that information, how are you going to work to mitigate that risk? So John, I'll let you talk a little bit about some of our different tools here, or different tools that you can work with. But in general, with security, we like to use the analogy when it comes to cybersecurity of an onion, right? It's not just one solution is going to fix all of your problems. It's really a question of layering as many security solutions as you can to cover all of your potential vulnerabilities. And you have to remember, cyber criminals aren't a static attack vector, right? They know exactly what security is available. They know what's in place, and they're constantly working to outmaneuver the newest and greatest technology out there. So just having something like antivirus isn't going to cut it anymore. You need to be proactive. You need to be working with a cybersecurity professional or have in-house expertise to keep you up to date on what's going on and how to stay ahead of the cyber criminals, because they are experts in this field and they are constantly working to outmaneuver companies like us who, you know, do this for a living. So I guess all that to say that, you know, traditional security tools, a lot of people think, you know, historically, like antivirus was just enough. Having a firewall was good. You know, doing some annual security awareness training was sufficient. Quarterly vulnerability scans, all of that is good to have in place. But again, as we've said, with everything continuously evolving, you need to be doing, there's ways to improve that posture, let's say. So for example, we always recommend EDR tools or endpoint detection and response, because it's one thing to have an antivirus tool that is just going to be using known threat vectors in an automated system to look for anything you may have. With endpoint detection and response, you're going to have real human eyes analyzing any alerts that come through. With those real human eyes analyzing those alerts, we can react in real time to mitigate a threat. Because if you have like a red flag pop up, but you don't know how to deal with it, well, then that's kind of pointless, right? Because you're still going to have that threat on your system. And now you just, okay, great, you know it's there, but now how do you mitigate that threat, right? So having new updated security tools such as endpoint detection and response tools, EDR tools, are very important. If you do not, sorry, go ahead, John.
Let me jump in real quick. Yeah, well, and like, so like on that modern security tool side, you know, like on that endpoint detection, so that's like probably the biggest one, because not, you know, I mean, like not only do you have, you know, human eyeballs, you know, on like alerts, but you know, but the methodology by which that they deem it an alert is different. So, I mean, they are taking events that are happening in your network on your machines that may by themselves just seem innocuous, but then they correlate events together. So they say, okay, so this, you know, like this event plus this event plus this event equals something suspicious that we need to look at, you know, and like, so then we look at it, and like, so then we determine if the threat is, you know, like is like a real threat, it's credible, or it's not. You know, if we see something running that's encrypting files at a rate, well, then we'll pause it. It stops it from, you know, like spreading across the network until somebody can look at it to determine if that process running is something that should be running or not. You know, so that is taking like those things that happen, and it's you know, like rather than it running rampant in your network for days, well, before you notice, well, then like we notice it right away, and like so then some of those processes get stopped before they can do all kinds of damage. And I think that is one of the main things. And like people out there are selling tools that do it, and that's fine. There are tools that alert and pause, but you need expertise behind the tools to analyze alerts and to figure out you know, like, I mean, like what is credible and what is not credible. And then if it is credible, well, then how to respond to it. I think that first bullet is probably the most important one of all of them. And MFA, the next one is definitely, I mean, like if you're not MFAing all of your accounts, email systems, if your vendors don't have some form of MFA on their software, I mean, like that is a problem for the vendor, because that is the standard thing. I mean, you know, every like insurance policy that you're going to try to get for cyber has the MFA question. And if you're not doing it, well, then you're more than likely not going to get coverage. I mean, that is just the way of the, you know, that's just the way the world is right now. I mean, it's a little bit of annoyance to have to, you know, MFA into an app and have to do another thing, but passwords by themselves are just not an effective way to protect your account anymore. They're just not.
John, maybe you can explain a little bit about what MFA is.
So I'm sorry. So, so like MFA is, you know, beyond your password. Well, then you need another form to like authenticate you into your account. And there are a few things that people do. So one way to MFA is there's an app on your phone that generates a code that is only good for a period of time. And like, so after you log into your account, well, then it'll prompt you for the code. And like, so you go to your app and then it generates you your 6-digit code and then you put it in and then it authenticates you in. That is the most common method. And that's the best one. There are some that will do text message codes. So they'll bang you a text message when you log in and then you put that in. And then the third one is like, some people will just send it to email, which I find to be the least effective, because if your account's compromised, the bad guys probably have access to your email, so they can MFA into your account through that email. So, like out of all of them, I think, like the app is the best one to use if that's available for your circumstance.
Bridget, were you going to add something?
Yeah, and we only have 10 minutes left. So there were a couple
Oh,
things
sorry.
we wanted to cover with CTR as well. So just wanted to add that iSolve does have the capability to, or it does. The login for iSolve is dual factor authentication, and that can be sent to a text message, which is the preferred method. So, for all of your employees that are currently logging into iSolve, and those of you who are on this call, I know you're administrators, you will see that the MFA is automatically enabled in the iSolve application. Did want to chime in here, John, just because we have about 10 minutes left and I'm sure people have some places to go. Just wanted to touch on a couple things from our standpoint. So if you want to look over. So from CTR standpoint, we talked about different audits that are available. CTR for many years has completed a SOC audit, and in the payroll industry, that is the typical standard for payroll processors to follow. And so every year, if you would like a copy of our audits, you are welcome to ask us for that, and you should get a copy. We do that at the end of, toward the end of the spring and in the summer. And we have an auditor that comes on site and they go and they test our processes and cover everything from just our payroll process in general, our ACH process, all the way through IT security. The iSolve platform itself is hosted on Microsoft Azure. So that is one of the top cloud computing, cloud hosting applications in the United States. We have daily redundancies and backups, as well as dual factor authentication, which we talked about. We also touched upon our vendor oversight, which we feel is very important, not only for us to do, but for you to do and ask us the right questions as well. Intrusion and endpoint detection, we just talked about that. CTR is doing those things as well. And I really think the most important thing from our standpoint is you can have all the best tools in place. We talked about this earlier, John and Mark, but really employee education and training in a culture of security is what you want to breed within your organization. And at CTR, from the moment an employee is hired, of course, we do the required background checks, but the minute they walk into this facility, they have a meeting the first day with Doug here, and Doug goes over all of our security requirements as any employee of this business, from sales down to, obviously support implementations. Everybody's aware of the things that we're doing and what to look out for. You want to click over to the next slide.
So let's just, since we're short on time, I'm going to go over quickly the things that CTR has seen. So email spoofing for sure. So somebody impersonates an email account. I'll give you an example. They send an email to a payroll person. That person reads it. It says, "Hey, I want to change my account, my direct deposit account to this." Well, they think it's a valid email. They change the account. The money's transferred to the fraudster's account, and the company's out the money. So that's we've seen that for sure. The unemployment fraud was in workers' comp fraud showed up during COVID. The fraudsters gained, they already had the social numbers and demographic information. And what they did is they filed workers' comp claims using the fraudsters' information. And then eventually it got back to the company. I mean, there was a major breach. That affected quite a few of our customers. And also what we see a lot too, and this really isn't like getting spoofed or whatever, but we see clients all the time sending us information or back and forth of PII information, person identifier information that is not secured. So if the SOS numbers are floating back and forth, if your people are sending them into us, they're in the email, they're unsecure, and it's possible that they could be compromised as well. So just something to keep in mind. If you want to go to the next slide. So we just go over this quickly, common sense stuff, but your first line of defense as far as all this stuff, especially with iSolved, is logging in. So just make sure you have strong passwords. We already went over the two-factor with iSolved. Change your passwords frequently. Do not share your logins. Make sure everybody has their own login. Don't reuse your passwords. And then make sure your passwords are unique to all your different applications. And because you have all these different usernames and passwords now, you're going to have to secure them somewhere. So, if you write them if you have an Excel spreadsheet or you write them in a notebook, just make sure it's secure. We don't recommend, you logging in from a public Wi-Fi. And then just a quick note here. iSolved has the ability to limit access by static IP address. So if you have, for an example of that would be, if you have hybrid employees and they work from home 1 day a week, you could set it up to where they only can log in from that IP address at their home. And then when they're in the office, it's fine. That way it'd be more secure than if they're sitting at a Starbucks. So the whole idea is we just don't want the bad guys. We want to make it as hard as possible for them to get in. So, and John and Mark touched on this, but CTR gets training, cyber awareness training through Black Bottle. And this is an example of just one of the fake emails that we get. So each month we have a new topic, a new cyber topic, whether it's phishing emails, ransomware, whatever it is. Every employee has to take a test. They have to watch a video and then they take a short quiz. And then, these fake emails go out monthly as well. And this is just to keep our employees on their toes, make sure that, they see that we feel this is important and they understand that. I mean, they know that if they don't, if they click on the wrong link in these fake emails, they might do it for real. So they understand.
And I just want to double down on that.
Yeah.
I want to double down on that
Sure,
because I think if there's the biggest thing we see as a payroll organization, it definitely happens around year end when bonuses are typically issued. The biggest thing we see are phishing schemes. And that is when someone in your payroll department or HR department receives an email from quote unquote the CEO. We all know about this, right? Asking them to change their direct deposit. And then we get a call from one of our clients saying, we accidentally paid a fraudster. What do we do? And this right here, sending these fake emails has transformed our business. And we've been doing this for several years. And we test our employees, right? So that they're not falling for those tricks. And then not only do we test them, we get reports. I review them with Doug. If anybody slips up, typically it would be a new person, even though despite we, reiterating the training, they're getting a call from me. They're getting an email from me because we're creating a culture of security. And to work in this business, you need to be aware of the risks. And that's the kind of culture you need to create within your organization. It needs to come from the top. And it needs to be something that's taken seriously every single day. And the more of you that are doing this, the less of these calls we have to field as CTR, because we hate it when the fraudsters win. We hate to hear from you that we paid a fraudster because you put their direct deposit information in and there was nothing we could do about it. And I want to just touch on, we've got a couple minutes left. So if you can fast forward to not this slide, not next slide. Okay, this is something that we are super proud of. And for the CTR customers on this email, I just want you to know it's happening behind the scenes at CTR. We have developed our own tool and it scans our ACH files every single day. And what we want to do is look for things that are happening to potentially catch the bad guys if something were to slip through the cracks on your end. So Doug, if you want to kind of go through just some of the things we're looking for to catch.
So what this software does is it just goes through and looks at the ACH file and then flags anything that we think is a problem. So we have 5 areas that we check. So that first is that duplicate employee payment. So what that checks for is that if multiple employees have the same direct deposit, they're flagged. Now it could be reasonable that it's valid because you husband, wife, whatever, but it's flagged, and then someone on our staff or team goes and checks it to make sure it's valid. They might even call the customer to verify it. The next one is every customer at CTR we've created has a payroll threshold. So we expect their payroll to be X dollars. If they go over that, what we've defined as the threshold, then it also flags that customer, and then somebody at CTR determines whether it's good or bad. We did the same thing with individual employees. We have a threshold. If they bypass the threshold, then someone on our staff calls the client or whatever, or verifies that that's a valid transaction. We also check for duplicate direct deposits. That's where employees, they have the same direct deposit set up with different amounts. So those are flagged as well. And then the last one we have is that suspect routing numbers. And what that is we have a list of routing numbers that have been known to be suspect in the past. We put a threshold on it. And then anytime one of those is used, if it goes past that threshold, it kicks out, and we have somebody look into that as well. So, I mean, just a quick example. We've had people that they've keyed in their salary amount into the hours, which overinflates the employee's paycheck considerably. And then this utility, because of that individual ACA threshold, kicks it out and stops it right now. So I mean, we're getting comments all the time internally that, oh, hey, we got somebody today or whatever. So yeah, it's definitely something. Go ahead, Bridget. I'm sorry.
What we're looking for, guys, is we want to stop. It's hard to catch all the little things, right? And we will sometimes, but we want to catch those catastrophic events. And we've heard horror stories at our payroll industry meetings, trust me, where there's a payroll company where one of their customers had somebody that hacked an account, and they went in and they changed the direct deposit for every single one of the employees in the company. And then when you process payroll internally, all those payments went to fraudsters. So by flagging duplicate direct deposits, we can say, oh, wait, so-and-so company has all of these duplicate direct deposits. This is fishy. We need to stop this. Or if suspect routing numbers, the fraudsters will open Green Dot cards, American Express cards, rather than a traditional bank account. And so we're adding to that list daily. What are these suspect routing numbers that we need to flag? And then we have some thresholds where, if we're seeing big dollar amounts under one of these type of pay cards, that we're flagging these and we're reaching out to you. Again, this isn't an insurance policy. We're here trying to catch what we can, and we're not making promises that we're going to get everything, but we really want to be your second line of defense.
Yeah, Bridget, also what it does too is it stops those funds from going to the bank, because once the funds are out, it's very difficult to get it back. So this is just the last resort, basically, before it goes, that CTR has in place to assist you, and it helps us as well, because it eliminates some of the problems that we have to deal with. So
we're definitely we're over our time. We had a few other things that we were going to cover internally. We can spend another 5 to 10 minutes. We do have the time. So Doug, if you want to just cover some of those things. And for those of you that need to drop off, by all means, we will not be offended if you fly the coop on us.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, we went long. My apologies to you guys. We went.
Hey,
long.
it's important.
No, that's
stuff.
fine.
We get it.
So not only do we have to worry about cyber fraud, but we go through this quickly. But I mean, you also have to worry about you can have bad guys on the inside too. So it could be whether it's your payroll staff or your supervisor staff. So what they can do is they can create ghost employees. and then pay those employees and the money can go to them as opposed to, you just think it's a regular employee. There's payment redirection, they can pay rate alteration, different rates, and then misclassification of workers. So what that would be like is they classify somebody as a 1099 as opposed to a W-2, and then they can pay that person and they may be the receiver of those funds. So, just like this is common sense stuff, but if you do have a bad guy inside, things you can look for, the employee's behavior, or they're living beyond their means. Are they unwilling to take time off? Are they unwilling to share or delegate responsibility? And then, another thing you can see is you're probably going to see some bank activity because the money's going to be not where you expect it to be. So you'll see some strange things there. But how do you deter all this? So, you can consider references, background checks on your new hires, or make sure that you're splitting up your tasks so not one person does everything. I realize that may not be possible with the size of your company. It may not be scalable, but at least, if you only have 10 employees and you have one person running pay, then maybe the owner needs to take a look at the payroll register and make sure that the pay is correct. Establish some checks and balances, your thresholds, have approval processes in place. If you have multiple employees that use the payroll system, make sure they're only accessing what they need to access. And then please do regularly, audit your payrolls regularly. It doesn't have to be every time. We'll go over reviewing what you can do on a payroll by payroll, but you should audit it, every so often, just to make sure that everybody is honest. Review all the notices that you receive from whether it's, it could be tax notices, it could be 401k, it could be workers' comp, it could be anything, but anything where you might suggest that the money's not where you expect it to be. And then make it easy for your employees to report fraud. Whether it's one specific person, phone number, employee, an email address, just make it easy for them, make it feel like they won't have any consequences if it does. So go to the next slide, John. Okay. And then we just wanted to go over some tips for verifying the pay each time. So we have already mentioned about how that we have a small window. Once you press that submit button, the ACH, when you run the preview, if you run a preview and you run a submit, there's differences. If you run a submit, there's stuff that happens in the background. For example, it creates the ACH entries, the transactions. If you run a preview, it does not. So once you press that submit button, we have to send that file at 3:30 in the afternoon to our bank in order for it to be processed that evening. So the window is very small to get those funds back. And like we said, it's very difficult to get them back. So we would recommend that you do the preview payroll. And then some ways that you can verify your payroll, just check your employee count, make sure it seems reasonable. Look at the payroll register. Do the hours seem reasonable? Compare it to the last payroll register to make sure that the numbers aren't crazy off. You want to look at your new hires. iSolve has a new employee and change audit report that you can take a look at. iSolve has an exception report, which gives you different tax notices, deductions, whether they were taken, garnishments. Please reference that. You can check your overtime and bonuses to verify your tax amounts, and any bank account changes. We already talked about spoofing and that kind of stuff. That's where you might pick that stuff up. And then, any pay rate changes, just to make sure there's nobody that all of a sudden went from, minimum wage to $100 an hour. And then have more than one person verify the payroll. So just to keep everybody honest, whether that's the owner, whether that's, the general manager, whomever, just make sure that they do that.
And I just want to chime in here. And the reason
Sure.
we're telling you these things is I will say it happens, I would say at least once a year. We hear from one of our customers that said that a payroll administrator or some administrator was stealing from them. And, if these reports are verified by someone else and reviewed, that's how these things get stopped initially. We're doing our part as CTR to try to catch those things as best as we can, but we don't know your business. So if the person's savvy enough and they're creative about the way that they're stealing from you, like adding multiple accounts that our detection software would not catch on the back end, we're not going to catch it. You know, if they go in and they get super angry one day and they change all the direct deposits in one day to their account, we would see that because it's going to be, you know, 100 direct deposits that are the same, and it would come up in our flag. But, you know, it really is important that you're doing these things on the front end to catch fraudsters that could be coming in, hijacking your account, doing these things, or even your own internal employees as well. So we thank you for bearing with us today and sticking over a little longer. There's a lot of you still here, so I'm hoping this was truly an interesting topic. If you have any questions, a lot of you already have my email and Doug's email, feel free to reach out. We will be sending out the recording, and if you would like to get in touch with Black Bottle, we think you should. These guys are great. They do have, I think you have a QR code, right, in the presentation?
We
That's
do.
available?
This is the
There it
QR
is.
code. If you would like to speak to us about anything, we'd love to talk to you. And thank you for having us on the call today, Bridget. We appreciate the opportunity to like educate.
Yeah,
Thank you,
great.
guys.
Thank you, everybody. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day. All right,
Thank you.
take care.
Bye.